Okay, Cyber students, in the last tutorial we looked at learning how to draw lines in our documents. And in this one we're going to learn about shapes. And the main tool we're worried about here is the rectangle tool. And if you hold down the rectangle tool, you'll see that we have a bunch of different shape tools, and we're going to look at all of them today. The rectangle tool works pretty similar to the line tool. I click and drag and I can draw a rectangle. If I hold shift while drawing, I can also get a square, or basically what it's doing is it holds the height and width equal, which of course makes us a square. These objects can be handled the same way the line is, in that you can change the color of their outline stroke, you can change the width of their stroke, and you can even do all the other things you can do with lines, like changing their width profile or, making the whole thing an arrow. But in addition, because it's not just a line, you can also change the color of its fill. So here you can see I give it a fill, and now it fills the inside of that shape. Here I'll fill the inside of this shape. Looking at our other shapes tools, you can see we have a rounded rectangle tool. It's pretty self-explanatory. Underneath that, we also have the ellipse tool. So this makes our ovals, and if you hold shift, you get circles. You notice it's grabbing the color off the last thing I made, which is the last color selection I made, so I can change them. And again, remember this isn't paint. You're not filling the white space. These are objects that exist in the white space, and the best way to look at that is to look what happens here. One object is above the other. If you've ever used PowerPoint, you're probably used to this idea of arrange, bringing objects forward and bringing them backwards. And you can get there with right click. Send to back, send to front. Think of each of these objects as sort of sitting above each other in space. Underneath the ellipse tool, we have our polygon tool and our star tool, which are pretty similar. The polygon tool defaults here to a hexagon, but if I click like I would with the line tool, you'll see I have some options. It has a radius, the way a circle would, and then it has sides, and so I can change the number of sides to get different polygons. And the star tool works in the same way. And the star tool is basically a polygon tool, only instead of drawing your number here and connecting them, it draws them all and then connects them to a smaller inside shape, is the best way to think about it. See, it has two radiuses. It has that inside radius and the outside one. So you can have 8 pointed stars, you can have many pointed stars. And just like the lines, you can resize them. And again, as I said earlier, you can sort of change what their outlines look like or how they're drawn. The last shape tool, since I know you'll want to see it, is our flare tool. And it's not quite the same as our other shapes in that it doesn't function the same way. Basically, it creates a lens flare on the page. And you can sort of change your colors in there and play around with it, but it doesn't quite function the same way as the shapes do. You can see it doesn't have a stroke and a fill the way these other shapes do. And it doesn't quite have as many uses. But if you want to bring out your inner J.J. Abrams, you can put some lens flares on different things. The last thing I want to bring to your attention in this tutorial is different ways to move objects around. You've noticed here that I can grab these edges of objects and resize things, and I've said if I hold shift that it constrains those proportions. But once I've picked up an object, I can also hold shift to constrain its movement. So here it will only let me move it up and down and at 45-degree angles. In addition, if I grab an object and go to move it, again with my black arrow, if I grab an object and go to move it, if I hold Alt while moving it, you'll notice that my cursor gets a white secondary arrow behind it, and basically it doubles. And that's because it becomes a clone movement. And when I let go, it gives me a second of whatever object I was moving rather than actually moving the object. This is one of the fastest ways to make multiple objects and shapes. Lastly, when I'm making an object, let's say a rectangle, if I want the object to be created from its center instead of from its corner, I can hold Alt during creation. And you can see here that I'm pulling out the whole object from its center point rather than building it out from its lower corner. You can hold Shift and Alt to constrain the proportions, and now I'm building a square from its center point. So I would say spend some time getting used to making shapes and using our different shape tools here. If you want, you can click this little arrow and pull the whole thing out so you have it here to play with. And when you're done with it, you can close it with the X in the upper right-hand corner. But get familiar with editing shapes the same way that we edited lines in the last tutorial.